everyone, and welcome to Time 100 Talks. I'm your host, Lolo Ganaike. Time's annual list of the world's most influential people, also known as the Time 100, is a reflection and a recognition of the leaders who are shaping our world. The last year and a half has certainly been a challenge, and this year's list is in large part a tribute to those who rose to the occasion and helped us all move forward. I'd like to begin by thanking our presenting partner, Cadillac, for making today's show possible. In anticipation of the full list reveal on September 15th, we're debuting a special series of conversations with 4 2021 honorees. We've already introduced music producers Timbaland and Swizz Beatz and Apple CEO Tim Cook. And today, I'm excited to introduce our conversation with another 2021 honoree, President of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, Sherrilyn Ifill. She's being recognized for her decades of work fighting for voting rights and racial justice. We're also spotlighting the legacy and achievements of a 2015 Time 100 alum, principal dancer with the American Ballet Theater, Misty Copeland. And now I'm here with President and Director Counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, and an honoree on this year's Time 100 list, Sherrilyn Ifill. Sherrilyn, welcome to Time 100 Talks and congratulations.
Thank you so much, Lola. I'm truly overwhelmed. I appreciate it.
How does it feel to be recognized in this way?
Surreal, to be perfectly honest. I work incredibly hard. I do what I do every day. It's work that I love. And, I don't think about things like, being influential. I think about, just doing this work and trying to move forward, democracy and inclusion for the people that we represent.
Voting rights in the United States has been a key part of your decades-long career and legacy as a lawyer, and it seems now more than ever the American right to vote is under attack. How has your entire career prepared you for this moment in history?
Well, I started out my career first as a fellow for 1 year at the ACLU, and the following year I was hired at the Legal Defense Fund, the organization I now lead, as a voting rights attorney, and that was in 1988. And so that's how I began learning how to become a civil rights litigator. The first case I filed myself was in Texas, and we just filed another case in Texas challenging the latest voter suppression law. But what it showed me, Lola, that's so fascinating is that, not only is it important to talk about the right to participate in the political process just as a citizen, and that everyone should have access to that right. But the truth is that particularly for Black people in this country, the right to vote is very much for us tied up with our belief that by engaging in the political process, we have the possibility of really transforming the lives of our communities, of our children in our communities. And we enter that space on behalf of our clients because they want to pass something along better to their children, and they want the promise of the 14th and 15th Amendments to the Constitution that were ratified after the end of slavery to ensure that they are true, full, and equal citizens. And that's what we do. So voting rights work is the heart of it. The Supreme Court said in the 1880s that the right to vote is preservative of all rights. Everything else emanates from that ability of a citizen to decide who will govern, who will represent them, who will speak for them in the political sphere.
In the past, you've stated that white supremacist ideology has, quote, recaptured America. What do you mean by that exactly? And what do you attribute that to? Disinformation on social media, a backlash to the first Black president, Donald Trump's ascension, all of the above?
All of the above, but it actually begins before then. I do think that one of the great successes of the civil rights movement was not just the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prevented discrimination in public accommodations, not just the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which ensured that most Black people in the country could actually exercise the right to vote, not even the Fair Housing Act of 1968, passed in the week after Martin Luther King was killed. But it was the shame that was associated with racism, that it became socially unacceptable to engage explicitly in racism, to demonstrate that you believe that fellow citizens were genetically inferior to you, or that you embraced any of the ideologies associated with white supremacy. And one of the things that has happened, particularly in the last 5 years, and I would say that yes, it is the backlash against the election of President Obama. It is the rise of President Trump. It is social media. And certainly, I really connect this with the rise of President Trump and his style of leadership, if you will, which is that he removed the shame. He removed the shame from everything. He removed the idea that there are things that you shouldn't say. There are things that you should struggle to control, that you should manage yourself in any way. He basically essentially said to Americans, you can be your worst self and it's still okay. And so we see that, the rise in hate crimes around the country. We see the ugliness of the rhetoric. We see the willingness of people to engage in explicitly racist dialogue and epithets, and to do so without shame. And that is something that we have seen in the past few years, but it's not actually kind of the beginning of it. Trump was an accelerant, and social media is an accelerant because it allows people to find other people who share their view, which can be a positive thing, but sometimes can be a negative thing, which is that it gives people aid and comfort in things they otherwise would have understood to be shameful, to be inappropriate, to be anti-democratic, to be counter to a functioning, healthy democracy and community. That is all true, but it's also true that we have never ended the effort to press forward white supremacy. And it can be seen in many of the voter suppression laws that were passed long before President Trump was even on the scene. We have never lacked for voting rights cases at the Legal Defense Fund. This has been continuous litigation for us since 1944, when Thurgood Marshall won what he called his most important case, which was Smith versus Allwright, which ended the use of whites only primary elections in the South. So we've been at this for a long time.
There's a lot happening in Texas right now. What are your thoughts regarding voter suppression, the Texas abortion ban, and the role the Supreme Court is currently playing in Roe v. Wade?
I am unabashed in my willingness to say what I see. I'm not an ingenue. I've been doing this work since 1988. And so I've had quite an opportunity to see America up close and to see what the flaws are and to see what the dangers are. So we sounded the alarm early, and yet people didn't recognize it. When Texas, since we're talking about Texas, passed its voter ID law in 2014, it was the most restrictive voter ID law in the country, and we sued to challenge it. This was after the Supreme Court's decision in Shelby County versus Holder, which removed the requirement of states like Texas to have to pre-clear any voting changes with a federal authority. And the first thing Texas did was pass a voter ID law that they had been unable to pass when they were covered by the pre-clearance regime of the Voting Rights Act. The voter ID law was so restrictive that it allowed you to use a concealed gun carry permit as a legitimate form of ID, but our clients, who were students at state universities, at HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities in Texas, could no longer use their student ID to vote. You couldn't use your tribal ID to vote if you were a member of a Native American tribe, but you could use your concealed gun carry permit. Now, this was in 2014. This is when Obama is still president and Trump is nowhere on the scene in terms of announcing any candidacy. We filed suit and we won. Federal courts and a particularly conservative federal appellate court upheld the decision of a trial court that the law did violate the Voting Rights Act. So what does it mean when a legislature meets for the purpose of passing a law that will keep some of its citizens from voting based on race? What did it mean when in North Carolina, the federal appellate court found that their omnibus voter suppression bill, the court said, and I'm quoting, used surgical precision to create provisions that they knew would target Black voters? That's white supremacy. That's legislatures meeting for the purpose of keeping citizens from voting. And in Texas, whether it's through this most recent voter suppression law that's been passed or through the terrible anti-abortion law, that was passed and that the Supreme Court allowed to go forward despite it clearly interrupting and undermining a woman's constitutional right to access to abortion. They are all of a piece. These are all part of the same effort. It's part of the same effort that the state is engaged in to keep schools from teaching the truth about the history of racism in the country. And the feature, Lola, that I find so concerning about all three of these is that the new tactic is to deputize Texans to actually confront their neighbors, right? The Texas anti-abortion law doesn't itself eliminate the opportunity to have abortions with the state taking responsibility for it. No, instead what it does is it deputizes Texans, incentivizes them with the promise of $10,000 if they prevail to civilly sue anyone who facilitates an abortion. Meaning if you drive your friend to get an abortion, presumably in state or out of state, right? If you are a doctor, if you are an abortion provider, you can be sued by anyone.
2020 appeared to be a game changer in the Black Lives Matter movement, and a number of corporations pledged to better their relationships with marginalized communities. What role should companies be playing in the civil rights movement?
Well, it's a great question that you're asking, because one of the things I'm very clear about is if we are to save and refurbish American democracy, it's going to require everyone's involvement. It cannot be that just those of us who are professionals, professional civil rights lawyers or activists are responsible for saving American democracy. It has to be everyone, and everyone has to do their part. And that includes those who most benefit from American democracy, as corporations do. And the Supreme Court has been very careful to say that corporations have First Amendment rights of citizens, right? The whole Citizens United decision allowing for these kinds of corporate contributions, is a reflection of that. It's the Supreme Court's protection of corporations. And many years ago, the Supreme Court essentially said that corporations have kind of personhood rights. Well, if you are a person, if you are a citizen, you have obligations to our democracy. Every citizen does. That in exchange for the benefits of living in a democratic society, you have obligations to it. As individuals, our obligations are to vote, to participate in jury service, right? We understand to pay our taxes. There are things that we have to seed into the democracy in exchange for the benefits of living in it. The same is true of corporations. They have to seed into the democracy. And saying I'm a job creator is actually not good enough. I'm a job creator. I lead an important civil rights organization. That's not really enough. It has to be that corporations are willing to use their voice and their influence to stand up for democratic values and principles. I've engaged in deep conversations with corporate leaders about this over the last 6 months. I'm incredibly proud of the leadership of Black corporate executives and former corporate executives earlier this year, when really they called the question and threw down the gauntlet by taking out an ad in the New York Times about voter suppression and about the need to stand clear in opposition to voter suppression. It shouldn't have taken Black business leaders to do it, but it did. And some corporations began to follow. But it's not enough for sure. And it's certainly not the same number of corporations that during the protests about the killing of George Floyd, protests that were in all 50 states of the country and that involved millions of people and that became international, the corporations that stepped up and said, we are going to support racial justice initiatives and organizations is not the same number of corporations that's willing to stand against voter suppression or willing to speak out and stand against Texas's anti-abortion law. So it's quite interesting to see when the country was in turmoil during the George Floyd protests, the willingness of corporations to step up and make these pledges. But then just 9 months later, when we return to them to say, okay, it's time. It's not just about the money. Thank you very much for your contribution to our work, but we need your voice and we need your influence.
So let's end on a light note. What is making you hopeful these days? What's giving you hope right now?
This is going to sound strange, but like everyone, I have my days where I'm dismayed by the turns that our country has taken, for sure. But I would say at this moment, more than at any time in my lifetime, more Americans understand um, what it means to fight for democracy. Understand that democracy doesn't just come in a box and you open it up and you stand it up and then it stays that way forever, but that it's actual work. I think people seeing us come so perilously close to the edge of the cliff has woken up many people from their lethargy and from their complacency, and seeing and feeling the energy of that clarity, even among people who are not particularly political people, but they see now that there's so much more that's been going on beneath the surface than they realized. And people want to know, by and large, what they can do. People ask me all the time, what can we do to help? And that makes me incredibly hopeful, because not only does that mean that there are people who are prepared to fight, but they're not fighting to return to where we were. They're fighting for something fresh and new and better. And that's what I've been fighting for in my career, not fighting to return to any nostalgic period of American greatness, which frankly, I don't believe exists. I think we have always been striving to be better. And so to see people beginning to awaken to the reality that citizenship is work is exciting to me.
Sherrilyn Ifill, thank you so much for being here, and congratulations again.
Thank you.
Time spoke with Misty Copeland, principal dancer with the American Ballet Theater and a 2015 Time 100 alum. Misty discusses her career, diversity in dance, and her new book. But first, a word from our presenting partner.
Cadillac is in a period of true transformation. By the end of the decade, Cadillac will be a completely all-electric brand. Lyric will be the first vehicle which announces this and brings this experience to everyone.
The Lyric is like no other vehicle that's come before it, but it certainly is going to set the tone for the future of Cadillac styling.
The future of Cadillac design changed when we made the decision to go all electric. The architectural mores that existed in the past don't exist anymore. It's design without constraints.
It was a ground-up design where we could take all the needs of the customer, all the styling attributes we always want, and bring the two together and really unify them into a single cohesive design. It has to be a story of discovery and of hierarchy, about this wonderful interaction of different materials and textures and finishes that are put together in such a way that they really hang together and you get this total cohesive experience.
It's all about the details and the ongoing discovery of those details. Cadillac design has always been iconic, and what we've done with the exteriors and the interiors have made them more approachable. There's a choreographed lighting sequence, and it's your invitation to get on board, just to welcome you, to start the relationship.
The vehicle lights up and welcomes you. You walk over, you touch the button, the door opens, you hop in, you close the door, you're in this fantastic environment, this beautiful lighting around you, it's this wonderful ambient experience, and then the car recognizes you and you drive away.
It's having a connection with you, and that's where we are today with Cadillac design.
Lyric is really the cornerstone for Cadillac's all-electric future. We believe in the future of a world with zero crashes, zero emissions, and zero congestion.
Cadillac has been a brand that's been about technology and about innovation, but in a very luxurious way. And that's something that we continue to this day.
The design of Lyric is spectacular, and there's more to come.
That moment being recognized as one of the most influential people in the world was shocking. I remember the exact moment when my manager called me and said, I think you're going to be on one of the covers. And I think to this day, it's hard to step outside of myself and see me as me. I just feel like I represent so many people, and generations of dancers of color, Black women in particular, Black ballerinas that were never given a voice or a platform, a stage to perform on. So it was a pretty big moment to see a ballerina on that cover and it to be a Black woman. This is an institution, this is an art form that is, rooted in European culture. Though, people of color have been a part of it from the beginning, we just haven't been recognized. The most change that I've seen since my promotion in 2015 is the conversations being opened. And that really didn't happen until this past year, until, this racial reckoning. What happened with the Black Lives Matter movement and the murder of George Floyd. It's really interesting to see how not only it has impacted the world, but it's truly impacted the arts and the ballet world in particular. I've been at the forefront of having these conversations about race and the lack of diversity in classical dance for my entire 20-year professional career. And within the past year and a half, this is the first time that I feel like we're having real, true, honest conversations where people are listening and responding, and not just putting a Black person on the cover of a pamphlet to promote a diversity project that they're really not putting the work into. It's been a long journey, but since 2015, I've been, focusing on these principal roles that were just kind of thrust upon me once I became a principal dancer, not like a lot of dancers that have a gradual experience of kind of stepping into these roles as a soloist, and then you develop, and then of course, all of the books I've been writing that I'm really, really excited about. Bunheads was a concept, a story that I have been just thinking about and trying to structure for maybe 5 years. And it's loosely based on my story, like growing up in a ballet studio and the circle of friends I had around me. You have a young Misty who's biracial, you have her best friend Catalina, who's Mexican American, and then other characters that we're going to bring in once we have book number 2 and number 3 and hopefully number 4 of different characters that really represent our diverse country, our diverse world. And so that's what I really wanted to show to young people. I also have a production company that I started about 5 years ago. So I'm working on a lot of incredible projects. The basis of wanting to do this is to really give a voice to people of color, tell stories that haven't been told, and also to show a different side and the many layers of an artist and a dancer, which I don't think have been depicted in film and in television in an accurate way when you think about ballet films. You can hold on to this beautiful history and continue to make new history. I will forever be a part of dance in some way, in some form, and having these conversations about race and about the lack of diversity. That's something that I think I was meant to do and born to do. So that will be what I hope will be my legacy.
There's something about the beauty of defiance, the electricity of change. Sometimes, to make your mark, you've got to be bold, to push boundaries. Because sometimes, you've got to shift the conversation and reset expectations. An icon doesn't follow a path, they determine it.
Thank you to all of today's guests, our Time contributors, and to you, our viewers, for watching today's episode of Time 100 Talks. I'd also like to thank Cadillac for making today's program and important conversations possible. Make sure to check out time.com/Time100 Talks to watch previous conversations and get Time delivered to your home by going to time.com/subscribe. and now artist, activist, and Time 100 alum Juanes is here to close out the show with a performance of Odio por Amor.
Como dos locomotoras a todo vapor y olvidamos que el amor es más fuerte que el dolor que envenena la razón. Somos víctimas así de nuestra propia tonta creación y olvidamos que el amor es más fuerte que el dolor de una llaga en tu interior. Dos hermanos ya no se deben pelear. Es momento de recapacitar. Es tiempo de cambiar. It's time to change. Es tiempo de cambiar. It's time to change. Es tiempo de saber. Es tiempo de cambiar en la mente de todos el odio por amor. Es tiempo de cambiar. Si te pones a pensar, la libertad no tiene propiedad. Quiero estar contigo, amor. Quiero estar contigo, amor. Quiero estar contigo, amor. Si aprendemos a escuchar, quizá podamos juntos caminar de la mano hasta el final. Yo aquí, tú allá. De la mano hasta el final. Dos hermanos ya no se deben pelear. Es momento de recapacitar. Es tiempo de cambiar. It's time to change. Es tiempo de cambiar. It's time to change. Es tiempo de saber pedir perdón. Es tiempo de cambiar en la mente de todos el odio por amor. It's time to change. Es tiempo de cambiar. It's time to change. Es tiempo de saber pedir perdón. Es tiempo de cambiar en la mente de todos el odio por amor. Es tiempo de cambiar. El odio por amor. Es tiempo de cambiar en la mente de todos el odio por amor. Es tiempo de cambiar. Es tiempo de cambiar el odio por amor. Es tiempo de cambiar en la mente de todos el odio por amor. Es tiempo de cambiar el odio por amor. Es tiempo de cambiar en la mente de todos el odio por amor.
Gracias.